Hello,
Yes,
everybody.
hi there.
These friendly
Hi,
faces.
Ruth.
I'm gonna turn on my fan for a minute. Let me know if the noise isn't too loud, okay? Because I'm sweltering here. Is this a foretaste of the world to come?
I'm not sure it's a forecast. I think it's what's here already.
Well, the only mistake I made is I wanted to just let everybody come in, and it's giving me this, I have to admit each person one by one.
Judy, it's been a long time.
Yeah, I've had a rough couple of years, actually.
Is that right?
Yeah, 4 back surgeries, couple dental surgeries, COVID.
Wow. Wow.
But
Well, your
Tina,
painting is
but Tina, you're a little
beautiful.
bit low in your frame.
Okay, just a minute. I'm still trying to set up something else here in the background.
Hi,
Your
Jackie.
painting has been wonderful, Judy.
Thanks, Paul.
Enjoyed seeing it.
It's sort of been my lifeline.
Sure. Well, I can sympathize because I've been in bed for a while. I came out.
Oh, boy. When I look at the screen, I look at these wonderful people, and I thank you, God, for knowing them, for being part of everything that they have created in the past and are creating now, and just I'm loving it. So I say to everyone who is on the
Steve,
yeah,
excuse me, but I just talked to Kate. She's trying to get in. It says someone has to let her in.
Oh,
I'm not getting anything to let her that needs to admit her.
Well, she's been trying to get to us.
okay. Tell her if she goes on to the website interfaith.
Why don't you just send her the link, Abigail? Send her the link to this session.
I don't have the link. I don't know. I'll go on and find the link. Hold on.
She is shown as a participant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Abigail is going to go in and send you the link again.
Okay.
You're not showing up on the green room before you get admitted.
Okay, well, I've been here for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I sent him a message saying I've been waiting, because I thought maybe something was wrong because I wasn't being let.
No, it's probably the link.
Oh, okay.
And Abigail is looking it up right now, and she's going to be sending it to you.
I'm sent. Does she want it texted or emailed?
Text or email?
Email.
Email.
It's easier for me. Okay. It's real easy if she got onto the website, because that's how I got on. But I'm going to send it to her right now.
I didn't go on the website. I just used a link.
Well, that's all I did. Yeah.
Okay.
You got hands all over the map saying hello to you.
Okay, I'm just saying from Abigail link, and I'm going to send it to you right now. Okay.
All right.
Okay, it's sent. So
All right. Let's see how long it takes to show up.
You're both in California. Oh, wait. I don't know if Abigail's in California.
While we're waiting for a moment, I would love to
But they may be in Chicago.
Let's see here. Come on. Oh, here it comes. Here it is.
May I suggest when we settle in, Dr. Labert, we ought to restart the video at that point. Let's do a new video.
Yeah. Deborah?
Wow. Well, it's going around in circles. So
good. Yusuf is on too.
Yeah.
Carolyn. Okay, Steve, you need to. Oh, you got it. Okay. Steve, you're muted.
There we go.
There we go. Let's start this all over again. Thank you again for all being here. Apparently, there's more people trying to get in, and nobody is showing me online that there's waiting room people. So I'm just hoping that they all get in at some point.
Steve,
Yeah,
You can, under your security settings, change the settings so that people don't have to ask to come.
I'd like to see where that is because I've got.
Do you have a
allow-
shield in your screen that looks like a shield and it says
Yeah.
security?
Yeah,
Where's your
And
sheet?
a little drop-down menu next to it will give you a list of options. And one of them says enable waiting room. If you uncheck that, that disables waiting room.
yeah, mine doesn't have waiting room at all.
Oh. Well, we have
I'm
different
gonna just
settings.
send it to chat.
And I don't see a shield on mine either. Where is the shield? Is it with all the other icons?
No, it's a host icon.
At the bottom.
You would only see it if you're host.
Oh,
Okay, tell you what, let's begin, and I will find some way to bring anybody else in that's coming in.
Okay.
Okay. Wait.
otherwise they'll say bad things about the interfaith community.
Ah, it's incredible. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the 7th Annual Interfaith Awareness Week. This is incredible in terms of that it's actually continued on for 7 years. And I'd like to just give you a quick history of what this is about. By the way, my name is Reverend Dr. Steve Albert, and I'm the director of the World Interfaith Network. And if I can show you this. Are you seeing Interfaith Awareness Week?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep,
Um,
it's there.
in 2017, we were fortunate enough in San Diego to be invited to do one of the North American Interfaith Network Connects. And for 5 days instead of 4 days, even though it says 4 days up on the cover there, we brought in 250 people from over 20 faiths, and we had a ball going to different places of worship, eating with everybody, just lunch, food everywhere. And we had 77 speakers that spoke in groups and individually, prayers in the morning and prayers in the evening. And the most important thing that came out of the program is that we set up a mission statement to honor and respect all faith cultures, creeds, and races, and to seek to learn from those who believe spiritual opportunity and human rights belong to every person. We went to the city mayors in the San Diego area, and 14 of the city mayors said, absolutely, we will bring this to our people, to our city councils, and they all sent certificates and just thanking us for identifying that everybody is equal. Well, there we were in San Diego with some wonderful, backing. And 1 year later, the governor of the state got the same information, and he said, well, let's make it a state celebration. My jaw dropped, and I said, well, okay, that sounds great. And 1 year after that, United Religions Initiative asked if they could participate with us, and they were in 107 countries. So all of a sudden, the Interfaith Awareness Week became a global celebration. In last year's program, we had 47 different presentations in 7 days, going 12 hours a day. So let me tell you where we are. We're in a website that allows you that if you get hungry in the middle of a presentation, or you need a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, you could go to the website and sit down and have a full breakfast if you want, or dinner, or it's all there for you. It is sugar-free, calorie-free, kosher, halal. It's even gluten-free. So come back anytime and have as much as you would like. Now, I mentioned that the reason that this program is not 7 days this year is because the Parliament of World Religions is having their program the same week. We're kind of the next week. And most of the people who will be on our program are going to the Parliament. So we shortened up our program to allow everybody the time to get to the Parliament and do what they needed to do. The reason I mentioned the Parliament is that this is the group that we feel was the beginning for most people of interfaith in the United States. And it had so much going on. I'm going to show you a video that was put together by Ruth Sharon Brody Sharon. And let me bring that one up.
The very first Parliament of the World's Religions took place in Chicago in September of 1893. It was during the World's Fair, the Columbia Exposition, and nobody really knew how many people would show up for the Parliament of the World's Religions, but 4,000 people came, and they met for the first time at the Art Institute of Chicago. It was a historic moment because religious leaders from the East and the West came together for the first time for interfaith dialogue. It was organized primarily by Christians, but many of the Christian churches would not allow their congregants to participate because it was a daring move. It had never been done before. And many Americans had never even met a Hindu, a Jain, a Buddhist. It was an epiphanal moment in the history of interfaith. So many different articles and books and memoirs were written about that event, and they differed in perspective, but they all seemed to agree on one point, that the highlight of that conference was the appearance and the speech of Vivekananda, a Hindu monk from the Ramakrishna order in India, tall, dark-skinned, stately. When he arose and said his initial words, "Sisters and brothers of America," the audience went wild. They leapt to their feet, and it took a while to calm them down so he could continue. I want to share with you now some of the words from his speech, because they point out that then, as now, the main goal is to eliminate violence in the world and to understand many streams, one river. That was his message to us. And it's the message that we still need to consider today.
Sectarianism, bigotry, and its horrible descendant, fanaticism, have long possessed this beautiful earth. They have filled the earth with violence, drenched it often and often with human blood, destroyed civilization, and sent whole nations to despair. Had it not been for these horrible demons, human society would be far more advanced than it is now. But their time is come, and I fervently hope that the bell that tolled this morning in honor of this convention may be the death knell of all fanaticism, of all persecutions with the sword or with the pen.
So what happened after that historic moment in 1893? Well, nothing for about 100 years, but seeds had been planted. And 100 years later, the monks of the Vedanta Society in Chicago said, we have to have a centennial celebration. We can't let this moment pass. And so they organized what is now considered the modern day parliament of the world's religions in Chicago in 1993. And they waited to see, and almost 10,000 people came from all over the world. People came, as the expression goes, out of the woodwork. There were people who just felt instinctively, they felt magnetized, they had to come to that important event. And so the interfaith movement took off in a huge way. And after that, in 1999, in Cape Town, South Africa, 2004 in Barcelona, 2009 in Melbourne, Australia, 2015 in Salt Lake City, Utah, 2018 in Toronto, Canada. And now in 2023, once again, the parliament will be held in the historic birthplace, Chicago. You should come.
So that was the beginning. That was the beginning. But as Ruth said, and Ruth, thank you for allowing us to see that. And let me.
Steve, maybe you could ask everyone to turn off to mute their microphone except for you, because there's a lot of background noise I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Until it's time for them to speak.
Okay, that'll take care of it. We're talking 1893. And as Ruth said in the video, what happened afterwards? And what's unfortunate is that not much.
Actually, I'm going to contradict you.
Okay.
Something I found out when I did a survey in the 79-80, trying to find interfaith activity in the United States, no Google. When I did a survey, the oldest interfaith council we discovered was in, of all places, Wichita, Kansas. In 1923 it formed, and it was truly multi-faith, including indigenous, which I didn't know and almost no one still knows. But there was more going on quietly behind the scenes.
Hello?
I'm sorry, my technical ability has become less and less, and
I'd be happy to add to that comment of Bettina's too. Are you there, Steve?
yeah, now I can get back into it. Okay.
I just wanted to add to what Bettina was saying about Nain, which is really doesn't get nearly as much recognition for what it did and continues to do. But on one hand, it's shocking how little came out of 1893. On the other hand, when you dig into the history, you find that an awful lot was going on. It was often ecumenical rather than interfaith, but they had major conferences in Europe and in this country, in the US. And Marcus Braybrook, who's turned 90 recently, his most recent book is called Interfaith Pioneers 1893 to 1993. and it really surveys the extraordinary people, the pioneers that carried on the interfaith vision that grew out of Chicago 1893 and helped build the momentum as we went. They planned to have this 2 or 3 times. World War really hindered the efforts. But there's an interesting part. If you're an interfaith nut, like some of us are, there's some important history there.
Yes, actually, there were 4 or 5 global organizations that were founded
Exactly.
pre-Parliament, including Religions for Peace and
Well, actually, that was going to be my next slide. We look at all the things that happened, but many of those things were happening after a longer period of time than we hoped for, because in 1893 was so wonderful, and then all of a sudden you didn't hear from people. Well, what'd you have? You had the Spanish-American War, you had the Japanese War, Russian-Japanese War, you had World War I, from 1929 to 1939. America had the Great Depression. Then from 39 to 45, we had World War II, the war to end all wars. So there were a lot of things that were stifling the starting of interfaith. And the chart that I've got up here shows you some of the things that did start to happen. And as you mentioned, in Wichita, Kansas, we did have in 1920 an interfaith group that started. And again, Temple of Understanding started in 1960. Well, here's the purpose for me for the rest of this day. And that is, I want to introduce you to 5 incredible people. These are people that help to reactivate the interest in interfaith. I'm honored to know each one of them. I call them my friends. And I'm going to ask them 2 questions. The first is, what year were you introduced to interfaith? And how did you get introduced? And what caused you to get involved? And so the first person I'm going to introduce is my good friend, Bettina Gray. And Bettina has been involved in the development of interfaith connections since 1975, with the beginnings of the Berkeley Area Interfaith Council. And then in the early 1980s, in the development of North American Interfaith Network. As co-producer and host of 27-part public broadcasting series, A Parliament of Souls, filmed during the 1993 Chicago Parliament of Religions. Her interviews with spiritual teachers and leaders have aired internationally on multiple networks. She has received the Interfaith Visionary Award for her leadership in interfaith relations, consulted and has spoken internationally on world religions, global security, and interfaith dialogue. So Bettina, turning this over to you, what year were you introduced to interfaith? How'd you get involved? I'll turn it to you.
Well, I was planning to say in the mid-1970s with the Berkeley Area Interfaith Council and its origins, but I will go back very quickly to my childhood, where my mother regularly hosted international students as they came through a tour. In Kansas, in western Kansas, we hosted in our home people from all over the world and of many faiths. And my mother was eager enough to later discuss with me what some of the implications at our dinner table were of the faiths of the people we were hosting for a week. And so that might well be my real introduction. Kansas has figured in interesting ways. I say that because a dear friend of mine from Kansas is here today, probably the first person, I mean, of all of you who I know well and love, Barbara Newsom, who's here today, and I met in the 70s in a trying to do peace work to to make sure that the riots and protests that were going on in the 70s, we were at the University of Kansas and we had organized a team to keep those peaceful. And that's how I met Barbara. So maybe that was my first interfaith work. The real official interfaith work was the founding of the Berkeley Area Interfaith Council in the 70s, which was actually seeded by a conference by the World Council of Churches to explore the idea of whether interfaith was feasible, which was at Nyingma Buddhist Institute. And following from that, we organized in Berkeley, had begun already. That was the beginnings.
Wonderful. See, it's really interesting when you start talking with people, and I think everyone on this in the group right now, once you start talking to someone and you realize where they've come from and the stories that they have and how interesting each one is, it just makes everything else better. Bettina, thank you for that. The next person I'm going to introduce is a gentleman by the name of Reverend Dr. Rob Hankinson. Now, I met him in 2008. What an incredible guy. He served 3 pastoral charges, 6 chaplaincies, held 8 teaching appointments, assisted notable congressional, interchurch, and interfaith work, engaged in numerous committees, task force, and assignments for presbyteries, conference, and general council during the 46 years of his 2-year stay in Alberta. When time permitted, he pursued his love of bicycling, and he returned home in the summer of 2019. Rob, can you give us some feedback as to how you were introduced to interfaith and what caused you to get involved?
Happy to do that, Steve. Hello, everybody. Something Larry Greenfield said to us when Nain met in Guadalajara in 2016 has stayed with me and has prompted perhaps one of my first memories of interfaith, although I didn't know at the time it was interfaith. I was in grade 2. I had a friend, his name was Tommy. I still, to this day, can't remember his surname, but there's a story. Larry Greenfield said to us in Guadalajara, talk to strangers. And I remember that one of the things I was taught at home and perhaps in society in Halifax, the home of Protestant and Catholic sidewalks in the early 1950s, was that you did not talk to strangers. And so when my mother discovered that Tommy was not a Protestant and was not a Catholic, was not even a Jew, but was something called a Mohammedan, my mother said, no more dealings with Tommy, no more trips to his father's store, no more bags of candy on your way home from school, thanks to Tommy's father and the corner grocery store. And I look back on that as a kind of a prequel to my involvement with interfaith. I knew not why, but I was clearly told, do not talk to strangers. Well, I think the Holy One will only tolerate that kind of thing for so long. And as Paul Chaffee knows, because I wrote an article for Tio a number of years ago, that in my very first pastoral appointment in Alberta, in my first of my 46 years there, I met the Imam of the Lac La Biche Mosque up in northeastern Alberta. He was one of my first visitors to the manse where I lived, and he wanted to know if he could join the ministerial. What a challenge. What a hoot. I had no idea if the ministerial would welcome someone who was not a Christian to their group. I was delighted to discover that the ministerial in Lac La Biche was quite open to having Imam Ahmed al-Shakawi from Egypt to be one of our members. And Steve, I look back on that as a kind of reparation and maybe a bit of reconciliation to that episode that I had in grade 2 with Tommy, whose surname I still cannot remember.
And if you could, you probably couldn't pronounce it, right?
Yeah, possibly not. Although this is a little addition to my comment. Well, one of the things I like to do now that I'm back in Nova Scotia, my birthplace, is to maybe find Tommy's family and perhaps apologize.
Interesting. Thank you, Rob. Our next participant is a wonderful lady, Reverend Kay Lindahl. We've known her for, I don't know, forever. I think we met everybody in about 2008 when they were all about 18 years old. And Kay is the founder of the Listening Center, author of the award-winning book, The Sacred Art of Listening, and a certified listening professional. An ordained interfaith minister, she is a dedicated spokesperson for the interfaith movement, having served on the board of key organizations and a past chair of NAIN, past trustee for the URI, and past ambassador for the Parliament of the World's Religions. She is a co-founder of the Alliance for Spiritual Community and Women of Spirit and Faith. Hi there, Kay.
Hi, Steve. Lovely to be here. Lovely to see everybody too.
Glad to see you. What year were you introduced to interfaith and how'd you get involved?
Well, I think it's probably around 89, 90, 91. And mine was sort of like a side path in. I was very interested in community work, and my husband and I had just moved to a new community, and they were having to create their zoning plans for the city. And I was involved in a new congregation at the time, and we discovered there were many new congregations for different religious traditions who didn't have homes. We didn't even have land. We were meeting in banks and various bank rooms and schools and auditoriums where we could find them. And we got together to lobby the city to make sure that there was zoning for nonprofits and houses of worship in the plan for the community. And as a result of that, we met quite a bit with the people from these various religious groups. And after that, we were successful in our quest for that. And after that, we decided we wanted to still meet. It was so much fun. And so I had sent out a letter to people, and I said, you know, we had such good times talking to each other before. Here's a question that I'd love to discuss with you. And it was, what would it be like to have a strong spiritual base in our community? And if you're interested, come to a meeting. Well, 19 people showed up. And that was the beginning of a small local interfaith group called the Alliance for Spiritual Community. And we started meeting every month and creating dialogues. And then because we knew all the people in the city, we were invited to do the invocations for the city council when you could still do that.
What year was that?
That was probably 91, 92. Yeah, and then I have found out about another organization, an interfaith organization called the Mastery Foundation, and they did a workshop called A Course for Those Who Minister. And so we invited them to come to our community and do this course with us. And it was on a phone call later on, a couple years later, that I heard about the Parliament in 1993. And like Ruth said in her video, I felt magnetized. I knew I had to be there. I didn't know why. I didn't know anybody. I didn't even know the woman who'd mentioned it on the phone. And I went there. And then, from there, that's when I met Elizabeth Esperson, who was chair of NAIN. Or I don't know if she was at the time, but she invited me to NAIN. And then I went to a NAIN gathering. And at the NAIN gathering, I met Bill Swing was talking. So that was my introduction to the URI. And that's sort of how my interfaith world has evolved. It's just been a web of connections, unexpected connections, and it started off in my own community.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Kay. And our next sharer he's kind of a shy guy, but he's a buddy of mine, Reverend Paul Chaffee. And Paul was ordained in the United Church of Christ, began his interfaith ministry at the Church for the Fellowship of All People in 1975. Over the next 48 years, and he's only about 50 now, over the next 48 years, has been an San Francisco Interfaith Council member, co-founder and executive director of the Interfaith Center at the Presidio, co-founder of United Religions Initiative, board member of the North American Interfaith Network, ambassador of the Parliament of World Religions, and founder and editor of the Interfaith Observer, which published more than 1,500 interfaith stories during his tenure. Paul, I read this over and over and I got tired. Okay. Paul, what year did you get started, and what brought you to get involved with interfaith?
Well, thank you for that introduction. A couple of short stories. My parents were Presbyterian missionaries in Asia, and led to a very interesting, crazy spiritual upbringing for me. I went to the confirmation class, I think when I was 12, somewhere around 1952. Whatever. And at the end of that course, very fine course, Ray Downs, a wonderful guy, taught it. And at the end of the course, the pastor showed up one Sunday when the class began and said, here, this has been pretty good. And they all said, yeah. We all said, terrific. And he said, now you'll be joining the church 3 weeks from now, right? And I couldn't believe my ears that he had actually said something like that. And totally pissed, I went to my father immediately after, when we got home. I said, what is this all about? I said, I'm just beginning to understand what you believe. I don't have a clue about the Buddhists. We were in Thailand then, all around us, much less the rest of the world. They want me to join? Hello? And he said, no. He says, not at all, not at all. He says, you will join if and when you wish, and don't feel any pressure to do so now. And the next day he gave me a book on the world's religions. For a Presbyterian missionary who'd grown up in a blue-collar world in Bremerton, Washington, that was, I thought, an extraordinary gift he gave to me. He was that kind of person. I think that part of my confusion about faith and interfaith, I came from the fact that I was a toddler in China and then grew up in Bangkok and went to high school in North India, covering that way the Taoists and the Buddhists and the Hindus of the world. I had every right to be quite confused. And I headed off and got through college and remained confused. Bible courses, theology courses had not helped an awful lot. But 3 people I encountered who made all the difference. One was Howard Thurman. Howard Thurman founded the Church of the Fellowship of All Peoples, the first interfaith congregation in the country or the world, as far as I know. Anyway, Howard had retired and come back to San Francisco from Boston. And I looked up from the pulpit at Fellowship Church one Sunday, and there he and Sue Thurman were sitting, and I almost passed out. I couldn't believe that this giant was in our midst, much less that I was meant to preach that day. Anyway, that worked out, and he became a mentor and dear friend. And I delved deeply into what was back then known as his devotional literature. It was something you have so that you know how to pray, I guess. And you know, today you can go to Graduate Theological Union and they do doctoral seminars on Howard Thurman's work. He's come of age finally. Books after book about him recently. So Howard Thurman and the course with Whitehead, Alfred North Whitehead. I took a doctoral seminar on Whitehead, and at the end of the year, the professor said, "Okay, here's what the grade will hang on this year. You want to write me a 25-page paper on the assumptions of Alfred North Whitehead." Oh. So that's what I worked on doing. But I was reading Thurman at the same time, and I found out, and I will not burden you with a lot of background on this, but I found out that they shared assumptions, and that they shared assumptions that were interfaith friendly. And my big purpose of going to seminary was to see if I could find a faith that didn't make other people wrong.
Okay.
That seemed to me cardinal, that we have a loving God, trying to tell people that I'm the only one who's loved. You guys aren't loved yet because you're not Christian. Just seemed obscene to me. And Whitehead intellectually and Howard Thurman spiritually put it together for me so that I felt free and able to fulfill the permission that my dad had granted me when I was 12. And it was all history after that. I was at Fellowship Church for some years, the Council of Churches in San Francisco, and then part of the San Francisco Council, Interfaith Council, and so on. And my wife, my lovely dear heart, Jan, and I co-founded the Interfaith Center at the Presidio, and I won't go into long discussions about that, but we had hundreds of interfaith programs that over the next 15 years at the chapel. Later, during that time, actually, I became very involved with URI and became friends of many of us here today. An extraordinary, organization. There are over 1,100 URI circles in over 110 countries today, and every month there are new ones, which is a source of great hope. URI was important, but at the end of my tenure at the chapel, and after having served enough years on other boards, I decided what was really necessary, as I quote retired unquote, was to tell the stories more. That the interfaith stories were not getting heard, and that they were incredibly important stories. Religion wasn't getting heard in American journalism, much less interfaith. I mean, you get one article on interfaith, in the New York Times a year, you're doing real well. So I founded the Interfaith Observer. A number of you here on the screen now have contributed to it, over 1,500 articles in the time I was there. And just loads of good friends, and sort of awestruck by a lot of people. I mentioned Marcus Braybook, the historian of our movement. Gee whiz, what a human being to bump up against, and more than dozens more after that. So by then I was full-fledged involved, Steve.
All right. And I should mention that Marcus sent me an email to say hi to everybody who comes to the conference. And, he lost his wife this past year. And
Last December.
But he is still just as strong as ever. Yeah. Oh, I should tell you one more thing, Paul. Why you're important to us is that when Abigail and I founded the Poway Interfaith team in 2006, we thought we were pretty much the only people in the world doing interfaith work. And then
Yeah.
somebody mentioned North American Interfaith Network. And we said, what the heck is that? Well, they're having a conference in San Francisco. This was 2008. Okay, we'll go. Abigail and I drove up there, and all of a sudden we're meeting 70, 80, 90 people from all over Canada and the United States and Mexico doing the work that we thought we were alone doing. And so you were the first road that we had into Nain. And I want to thank you for that.
Well, wouldn't be here without what Bettina and half a dozen others put together in the 80s.
Yeah. So, you know Paul now, and there's only one more person that I need to bring on that is, what do I say about her? She is just powerful beyond measure. She has done things that we hope we can all do in the future. And Ruth Brody Sharon has been honored internationally for passionate interfaith activism and leadership. Filmmaker, journalist, author. She's the creator of Meet Me There, which there's going to be a showing of later today. The interfaith musical, an exuberant celebration of our cultural and religious diversity. In recognition of her contributions to bridge building, Ruth received a gold medal in Geneva from Fête d'Excellence in 2000 and 2013. She was invited to serve on the Martin Luther King Jr. Advisory Board of Morehouse College. That same year, she received a special commendation for her interfaith leadership from Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti. I hope I said it wrong. Her documentary, God and Allah Need to Talk, and her interfaith memoir, Minefields and Miracles, received multiple awards. Ruth has contributed more than 50 articles to the online magazine, The Interfaith Observer, that Paul was mentioning, and co-authored the 2018 Amazon bestseller, 21st Century Voices, Women Who Influence, Inspire, and Make a Difference. So Ruth, to ask you the same two questions. What year were you introduced to interfaith, and what caused you to get involved?
Those are fascinating questions because it causes each of us to, to really look for the seeds of our, what I call the magnetic effect of interfaith. And by the way, Kay, when I said that in the film, I was thinking exactly of you, because you told me how you heard about the parliament. You didn't want to know anything else. You just knew you had to be there. And so I think that many of us here today have felt that attraction, but not just, oh, it's fascinating or interesting, but mesmerizing attraction and almost a visceral feeling, I have to be involved in that. Mm-hmm. So when I look back at my life, I had a mother who was born in Latvia, Riga, Latvia. She was a Hebrew school teacher and very, very immersed in her Judaism. And we lived in a kosher household, and she kept the Shabbat, and she was married to a man who was identified as a Jew, but he was a universal human being that was interested in everybody. And so I had those two pillars. And I was in the middle watching both of them and trying to figure out how to incorporate them into my own life. I didn't know I was doing that, but later my daughter said to me, you took your mom's interest in Judaism and you took your dad's interest in the world and you merged them together. I think my first seminal moments for me, excuse me, seminal moments for me were two, when I was a teenager and I discovered literature about the Holocaust. And I think I went through a year of mourning, trying to figure out how that was possible. And then the second very important moment in my life was when I was in college and I wasn't allowed to live on campus my sophomore year, even though I had won an amazing number in the lottery to be able to choose second of choosing where I would live. And I was told by my house mother that that my three prospective roommates, two Catholics and one Presbyterian girl, that they were told that I couldn't room with them and that because I wasn't going to be allowed to come back on campus. And when I queried her, she said, you need to talk to the head of admissions. And I went to his office, and during the course of that interview, which, you know, it's like we say BC and AD, excuse me, we say BC and AD. So for me, it was before that interview and after the interview, because during that time, he said to me, maybe you should talk to a Jewish family and see if you can get housing with them. And I was so puzzled by that comment. I never identified myself as being Jewish. I never came up before then. And I said, why would you say that? And he said, oh, you know, for dietary reasons and so forth. And suddenly I realized that the head of admissions of a major university was worried about my diet. So when I left his office, the world had changed forever. And that was my first direct experience of anti-Semitism. And the first thing I did was to join the Human Relations Committee on campus, where we were fighting for the rights of the African students who also couldn't get housing because local people complained they didn't like the smells of their food that they cooked, you know. And I was thrust into this world of understanding about prejudice, discrimination, and ignorance, really. And after I left the university as a journalist, I spent a year and a half in Latin America. I lived in 19 countries, 54 cities. I lived with families wherever I went. And I was exposed to culture from the inside, not as a tourist, but from the inside. I wrote stories about my travels. And so I was starting to get the picture of the world, about how so many different people of so many different backgrounds were my brothers and sisters. And not that I didn't know that before, but I knew it in a real way. And I was so imbued with the Latin culture that when I came back, I spoke English with a Spanish accent. And I had culture shock. But so that was the beginning of my world travels. And wherever I went, again, it was this understanding of the beauty of so many different cultures that were not my own, and the frame of reference that each of these people had based on their religious beliefs. I didn't know what interfaith was, but I was doing it. And I think that many of us kind of came to this road the same way, that we were magnetized, we were drawn to it irresistibly. And then later we figured out there was a movement attached to it. Who knew? But the first time I officially organized something was in 1991, when I had an interfaith Seder for Passover with 85 people. And I think my then husband, I think he wondered who he was with, because he kept saying to me, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And I said, I can't tell you why. I only know I have to do it. And I had it filmed. I was a filmmaker. I hired a film crew of 3 people. And when I looked at all the material afterwards, I thought there must be wonderful Passover stories out in the world that I haven't learned yet. And so I started to do more research, and then people just tumble out of the heavens from Ethiopia. I learned about the Jews who were trying to escape and were imprisoned, taken back to Ethiopia, had Muslim jailers, and the jailers who hated the Jewish inmates ended up preparing matzah for them for Passover while they were in prison, because they all believed in God. You know, I found the most amazing stories. I discovered a Seder for recovering alcoholics, Seder for feminist Seder, Catholic worker Seder, on and on and on. And all of this led me to a lifetime of interfaith engagement. So I had those two primary influences from my parents, right, of seeing the world both as a committed Jewish woman on one hand, and then second, as someone who belonged to the world and who was interested in the world, from my father. He used to bring home African-American people, Chinese people, people from Vietnam, and they were just people, you know? And so that's how I met them, and that's how I introduced my children the same way. So the last thing I'll say that was very informative for me is that I discovered when I was writing my book, Minefields and Miracles, and as a result of it, I made the foreword of my book the comments of Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook, the first chief rabbi of Israel. And this was in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And he calls it the fourfold song. And he says there are people who sing the song of themselves and the people close to them. Then there are people who sing the song of their larger community. And there's another group of people who sing the song of their country. And then there's another group of people who sing the song of the universe, of the cosmos. And all those songs are important. And that rabbi, when I read it, I thought, this is a man I want to be my mentor. Who is this man? And I discovered he was from the late 1890s, early 1900s. And it turns out an Orthodox Jewish rabbi whose own community was unhappy with him because he was too involved with the secular and non-Jewish community. So those are my roots. And I'm still magnetized today. And I'm still so happy to be among my colleagues and friends who we were given this mantle before we even came to this world. And it's nice to be seeing you all again. I think we've met before and we will meet again.
Thank you, Ruth. You were so wonderful. For those of you who had not met my guests for this day before, you now have a better feel for who they are and where they came from. So I'm going to ask each one of them one more question. I'm going to start with Bettina, and I'm going to ask the question of, where is interfaith going?
Well, I don't know. I think we all face change like we've never seen in our lifetimes, and the next generation even more so. I thought about this. I've thought long about it all through COVID and many other parts of our changing world, and put together a short PowerPoint that I'd like to share with you. These are still preliminary thoughts, and before I say any of that, any one of the people on this screen could be talking, answering your question. It would be fascinating. There are it's such a lovely group of people. I have the privilege of time to have had a chance to know most of you, and that's my encouragement in life, is to know you're out there in ways, in your community, in large ways, organizationally, in personal ways, one at a time. You're a stellar group of people. Thank you for who you are. So let me share this on a share screen, the PowerPoint, and I will try to get this organized well. Let's see if I can get this done.
Better than I do.
Everybody see?
Yeah.
So the logo up here at the top is the old original logo that we developed out of the North American Interfaith Network. My presentation will make reference to the North American Interfaith Network because that was my main experience over time, but this does reflect a lot of what was going on in interfaith beyond just the North American Interfaith Network. It was handshakes over North America originally, and that was then. Now we have a new logo. The young folks in Nain designed with exciting colors and interweaving realities. I'm a musician. What you can see when you see me on the screen behind me is, it looks like a bookshelf. It's actually music manuscripts. My original training was in music. And thinking over where we're going and what we're doing, I remembered something my main teacher shared with me and I have seen. We all have a romantic vision of how music is created and where it came from, and pictures Hollywood theater of Beethoven tearing his hair out and whatever. The reality is that most of the classics that we received relate to an improvement in the instruments that were available at the time. And I'm going to extend that to where we are now. So keep that in mind. For instance, Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier came about the change in the way we tune instruments to equal temperament. The virtuoso works because we had a pianoforte that could be played rapidly with more expertise than the old claviers. Our romantic classics evolved out of the fact that there were now valved brass instruments that could play chromatically, and when they joined the orchestra, it gave whole new ideas to the composers. Similarly, what are we doing with the changes in the world we live in now? And what does it mean for interfaith organizing and structures? Some people fight the changes, but I believe it will allow for new music, new orchestration, social architects working together to build new connections. Let me give you a bit of the backdrop of where we were then. In 1965, the Immigration and Naturalization Act allowed for Eastern European and South Asian immigration, and it meant that communities across North America were now living together in new ways and faced with a broader definition of the term us. Who was us? We were now a much larger cultural diversity. In '66, this Time magazine cover came out. The Los Angeles Times said it rocked the world. It was one of 12 magazine covers that shook the world. I remember this. I was in my teens. It was a discussion about secular and spiritual community and our own identity, religious or not. In 1968, we got the first glimpse of the world from outside of, from space. I think everyone, somebody needs to mute. We're getting your sound. I think it might be Paul from The Voice.
Nope.
You need to mute. So people were challenged looking at this to think of the whole planet beyond the traditional boundaries. This is the world in the 60s. The world in the 70s and before were facing nuclear threat. By the way, today is the anniversary of the dropping of the bomb in Hiroshima on August 6th. Eventuated a Cold War, which was underlying the nuclear threat. We had war in Southeast Asia. We had the military draft. I remember as a young person, all of us worrying about who in our families would be forced to serve in a war not everyone agreed with. that bred a distrust of the institutions of society
Yeah,
and created a
may
generational
need
divide.
one more minute.
As a host, Steve, I think you can mute everyone.
Yes, I've just done that.
Thank you. The generational divide in my youth, the phrase was don't trust anyone over 30. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Well, now I'm listening to folks who are claiming that the world is a gerontocracy and hoping that the older generation will disappear as soon as possible. We faced deadly anti-war protests, the free speech protests, the civil rights movement, riots in many cities. This is why people of faith, all faiths, felt it was important to come together to rebuild community, and we could no longer simply do it in our own private niches. The early founders of NAIN shared a skepticism of the institutions, of buildings and budgets. We wanted to experiment with new ways and social flexibilities. We chose the word network with great intention. But how do we build it? These were the tools we had. That what television was and newspaper were our main source of information. Telephones, dial-up, and expensive. Letters, slow. Faxes brought a little bit quicker delivery of information. Offset printing, our first NAIN directory, which we had to laboriously discover who was to be in it by phone calls and snail mail and survey. And the only way we could get together to begin to organize was to fly somewhere. We flew to New York. We had no idea how many interfaith councils there were, and there was no Google to find out. They were not covered in the media. News media did not consider interfaith, and I would put to you still doesn't, newsworthy. No internet, no instant searches. Video conferencing was a subject for science fiction. Now, this last month, Joe Biden said, name me a part of the world that you think is going to look like it did 10 years ago, 10 years from now. Change is upon us. Are we building our healing networks based on the past or on the present? What is the cost of our current structures and buildings and budgets and flights? What is sustainable and how will we justify these? In your mind, go back to the image I showed you of the Earth as people first saw it from space. This is the new image of Starlink satellites connecting the world. And Elon Musk said only a few months ago, I may have more real-time global economic data in one head than anyone ever. However, he owns it privately. It isn't owned by a government or a collective of governments or the UN. It's a private ownership. And on his decision, the people in the Ukraine who need satellite connectivity can have it taken away, as he did a bit. 3/4 of the people over 10 own a mobile phone. This graphic shows the percentage of people, how many people own, and with that ownership of a mobile phone comes banking, internet connectivity, free calls globally. Now we have face-to-face free video conferencing, something that was science fiction, and it's global. This is a picture of a recent meeting of interfaith leaders from Ukraine, California, Pennsylvania, Rome, both of them from Rome. Soon, artificial intelligence will shape our lives and ability to communicate. Who do we trust? In this graphic, it shows all the different aspects that artificial intelligence will shape. And interfaith networking has been based on relationship and trust. What is that going to do when we have artificial information providing us entertainment? How media literate are we? How do we know to detect what is a deep fake or a real conversation? It's still based on relationship. This is the world population in 2050. The yellow and orange are the aging and oldest populations. The green are prime age populations. By prime age, I think this graphic means work age. And the turquoise are still very young. Keep this in mind because overlay it with where global warming is going to create severe drought, desertification, and resource problems, and you will see that the key place for young and working age is also where global warming will hit most severely. And what does that say for peace? How do we build a network of trust in the 21st century with 21st century tools? And in the practical world, how do we allocate funds and resources? How do we justify 10,000 people flying internationally to meet for a week? How do we keep the continuity of experience that we've built also? How do we keep our bounds and trust and build it? How do we build communities of trust and compassion? The world's going to need a lot of it. What tools will we need, or can we create to make that work? That's my then and now.
Thank you, Vicky. Wow. A lot of work went into that, young lady. Rob?
I don't have the answers. These are to raise the questions.
So Rob has the answer. That's why I'm going to ask him, what's the future of interfaith?
Are you asking me?
No, Rob.
Oh.
But Bettina, you go ahead. If you have the answer.
Oh, bless you, Rob.
Steve, I go back to Larry Greenfield's advice to us in Guadalajara when Nain met there in 2016. And he said, talk to strangers. So I've been thinking about that a lot. I told you my formative story, but I'm thinking now about the world in which we live. I live in a part of the world which was described as having nothing happen. It was a quiet place, very quiet. And I think up until about 2020 during COVID, nobody paid much attention to this part of the world. And then we had a massacre. And then suddenly people started to pay attention. And we had a number of disasters of a human kind in that year. But most recently, we've had a hurricane, we've had a drought, we've had major fires, and in the last couple of weeks, we've had floods, all quite unknown by and large to this part of the world. For me, the future of interfaith involves conversation, talking with everybody, but especially people of goodwill, whether or not they profess a faith tradition. I'm assuming that all people of all faith traditions would have an investment in peace, in justice, in the sustainability of our creation, the Holy One's creation, and in compassion. I always make that assumption. Most of the time, I find I'm right. Sometimes I'm surprised. Then I discover there are all kinds of other people who do not profess faith, but are committed to justice and peace and the sustainability of creation and compassion. No one has a monopoly on compassion. I remember Elizabeth Esperson saying to us in Dallas when Nain met there in 1995, she said, no faith tradition has a monopoly on Thanksgiving. Well, no faith tradition has a monopoly on compassion. And compassion is not just the home of people of faith. It's the home of people of goodwill, people who work for and speak for the betterment of humankind here and now. I think that interfaith will take brand new directions under new leadership in the years to come, where we engage people to do what Larry Greenfield said: talk to strangers, talk among yourselves, make good decisions, live out your commitments. Thanks, Steve.
Amen, Rob. Passing it over to Kay.
Oh, preach it, Rob. That was great. I'm following a preacher is not a good thing to do always. But what I've been thinking about is the numbers of people, the growing numbers of people who do not express that they are affiliated with any particular religious tradition or faith. It's like 30% of the people in the United States right now. That's a huge number of people. It's as many people as probably are, almost as many as are affiliated with a religious tradition. So I think, Rob, what you just said, it's going to be less focused on a faith relationship rather than human people-to-people relationship. And relationship, again, for me is key. And I think one of the things that I've been thinking about recently is that the Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General of the United States, has come out with this paper on the epidemic of loneliness in the United States. And it's global as well, that over 50% of the people in the United States express loneliness. And so there's what he has suggested, he calls it social connection. We need to focus on social connection. And perhaps that's another way to talk about what interfaith can become, is social connection, that we connect with people, not necessarily with religious traditions, and people will have all sorts of belief systems going there. But there's something about this notion of loneliness. And then the third thing I was been thinking about lately is I've been listening to some work by Diana Butler Bass, and she was talking about the history of Christianity. Mostly that's her field, but I think it applies across the board to interfaith as well. And she said, in the past, the way to get into Christianity was that you believed something, and then you had certain behaviors, and then you belonged. So there was a pathway to belonging, was through belief, behavior, and then you belonged. Now it's upside down. She said, you belong first. You find people you want to hang out with. You create relationships first. Then you figure out what the behavior is. And then eventually, if there's anything that needs to happen in terms of feeling like you're a member of something, that's the last thing that happens. But it's mostly the focus on relationships. So I think interfaith is probably, as you said, Rob, the young people, and Bettina, you did too, that there's a way of looking at this differently. And I count on people who are younger than I am to see it, because I'm of the elders now, the elders that are being kicked out. Is that what you said, Bettina? That they're waiting for us to leave so they can do new things. But anyway, I think that there are going to be new ways of creating the kinds of relationships and the kind of connections that interfaith has been doing in the past, but I think it's been limited, and it's going to get much broader. That's it.
Thank you, Kay. If I can echo your statement about loneliness, when I was writing my first book in 1985, it was called Peopleism, that you believe in people. And I went to Jill Jackson Miller in Beverly Hills. I had lunch with her a couple times. She's the author of the song, Let There Be Peace on Earth. And in the middle of our lunch, she said, you know what the worst and the biggest problem is in the world? It's loneliness. If you don't feel you belong, you don't do well. And that stuck with me, and I've used it in many sermons and whatever, but the idea being exactly what you were bringing out. Thank you. Thank you. Paul, what you been doing, Paul? What's going to happen in interfaith? And yes, you are muted.
Unmute myself. Thank you for the gathering, Steve. I'm my only chagrin is that we can't hear from everyone, because I know the gathered group is really full of experience and wisdom. Maybe we'll have some time at the end for some Q&A.
Well, just to let you know, this idea, what we're talking about, goes until 8 o'clock tonight.
Okay. I have often thought of 1893 to 1993 as phase one of the interfaith movement. It's an introduction, I would think. And many different things happened over that 100 years and in the 50 years since then that have been exciting, that have taken a lot of work and activity. Judy, I think of the organizational gifts you gave to Nain over the years. Rachel, I'll never forget, Rachel, you and Greg bringing big pots of food downstairs in the chapel when we had our monthly meals. Gail, the way you dragged Canada into the US and gave us a new consciousness of what could be possible, not necessarily what we need to do, but what they've already done. So in that sense, I really think we've taken a first big step, and I would agree with everything that people have been saying today so far. It's a vast and big question that you posed, Steve. If that's phase one, what's phase two? I've thought of phase one as the place where we've sort of gotten our tools out, our skills together, all the way from databases to email to phone calls. We've been learning how to get together, how to meet together, how to respect each other across the board. And those are very important skill sets as we walk into the rest of this century. In particular, that's what we're looking at right in the face. I'm scared to death about where we are going. I mean, all the stuff that you brought up, Bettina, that we face today. If the last 100 years were war after war after war, the next 100 years looks, what do you want to pick? You start with climate. So I really think that we're shifting now from getting acquainted and learning how to do that. 30 years ago, if you called up for a number from back then when you had to, instead of Googling a phone number, you called someone and said, could you help me get in touch with? Well, we've learned those skill sets, and now we really have to take them much more seriously because we're in more serious straits. If I were to pick a theme for the second phase, it would be implementing cooperation or collaboration. I think across the board in interfaith organizations, large and small, is a realization that we can't do it on our own. I don't care what your organization is. I don't care if you're as big as URI or as popular as the Parliament or whatever. Your own local, wonderful local interfaith council. We can't do it alone. And so we've got to hold hands. And I think people in the various issues, one of the places I remain quite strongly identified is with the voices for a world free of nuclear weapons that Bill Swing started about 15 years ago and is doing some extraordinary work. Today's a very big day for voices because this is the day we commemorate the bombing of Hiroshima.
Hello.
It hasn't become nearly as important in people's minds, but at least it's a place where we can remind people why.
Thank you for calling. You're up at a camp somewhere?
What?
Who is this?
Oh, Earl, can you close your phone?
So we want to ask, so let me get my wife.
Just close everybody again, Steve. And then
suit up?
I don't think it's coming through mine.
No, it isn't. It's from,
In any case, to finish up, I think we have the tools in our hands and we need to work with each other. I guess that's what I would bottom line this. We can't do it on our own. And guess what? The people in the organization next door that you have always heard of but not become involved with is doing amazing work. Charter for Compassion. Are people here involved with the Charter of Compassion? Well, lo and behold, they haven't talked about it much, but they are an interfaith organization, implicitly more than explicitly. Although if you ask them, they'll say, of course we're interfaith. But that's the point. Back in the day when I called up for someone's phone number, I would say, I'm looking for the interface. They say, okay, interface. This is a technical company, right? And I say, no, not interface, but interfaith. That kind of confusion is much less these days because the interfaith shows up in the paper almost every day, although it's not necessarily nice stories. This is Sunnis and Shias fighting each other, or, Baptists and Baptists fighting each other, et cetera, et cetera. So the question is, can we learn to use this newfound reputation that we have to make a world a better world, or make a world a survivable world? And that's the challenge, I think, in front of us. Enough of me.
Hey,
Thank you, Steve.
thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. Before I bring up Ruth, who is a wealth of knowledge, I have to let you know that the rest of this evening, Ruth is going to be very involved at 4:00. And it's actually this one's going to go a little bit over because we started a little late. Ruth is going to be talking about looking back and looking forward. And she's got a video that brings in some heavy duty people, including Mr. Paul Chaffee, who's up there. And at the end of the night at 6:00, she's presenting Meet Me There, which is part of the evolution of the musical Interfaith the Musical Volume 2. So
Steve, Rachel had her hand up. I don't know if you noticed.
no, I didn't see. Rachel?
There I am.
There you are.
I just wanted to, Paul made some really salient points. I was just listening to a convention in Europe where they said that phase one was tolerance, just being able to sit with a different religion and say, it's okay, I want to hear what you have to say. And then it moved from there to trust and individual relationships, and that the next phase would be cooperation. And thank you, Paul, for making those points. I just wanted to say that was something that I picked up from European people.
I wanted to also add a question or a comment about phase one or even phase two, whichever we're in. I think phase two. This is a rhetorical question, but most of you have lived during this time. For the past 30 years, interfaith leaders have been coming across the world and meeting by the thousands face to face to try to address this. How many of you seen any serious coverage in all that time, or do you expect any serious coverage this time in Chicago? It isn't happening. And as Paul pointed out once about Nain, it's great. Nain has, this is the good news, bad news, and this is just Nain, but cooperatively, as all of our organizations, he said on a board meeting once, I still remember, bad news is we have no real budget. Good news is we have no real budget. Good news meaning that we've been able to operate, basically fly under the wire, not pull real negative attention or disruptors, and have been able to operate for 50 years building these networks of trust.
It's interesting.
Carol King has her hand up.
Yeah, Carol, I'll be with you in just 1 second. when I began the World Interfaith Network, my purpose, I felt, was to bring together those whose words we were not hearing. The small groups. It was wonderful that once a year we had a conference in a certain city. But to find out that there's 10 times that number of people and organizations that are doing the interfaith work and don't call it interfaith. I think they need to be identified, and that was the purpose that I was looking for when I began the World Interfaith Network. Let's bring on Carol, and then we'll go to Ruth, and we'll close it out in the next 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll start again at 4 o'clock. Carol, you're muted. You're muted,
Or
Carol.
Western, what, Eastern or Western time you start again? At 4? Is that going to be 4
Pacific.
Western time?
Pacific time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so mumuch. I'm Carol Sochek King, and I'm so glad to be in the interfaith movement because of Ruth Sharon, also because of my lifetime study since I was a little girl in the power of the mind through the Christian Science Church. I was baptized Episcopalian, but always never, I wanted to rewrite it and include everyone. And I'm very, I gravitate to interfaith too, and it's a magnetic pull and a part of most of what I write about and have in my life. But I just wanted to say, so the compassionate, whether they are religious compassionate or they don't have a religion, but they're compassionate, there's much to talk about and much to do. And we know that God's all powerful, but we have not addressed the huge, powerful, seemingly powerful people with the role of genocide that is in this world, and through so many angles. And I don't see us talking about this. And maybe we shouldn't, and I would refrain from bringing it up, but it's on my mind all the time, just as interfaith in the spiritual world is always in my mind.
Thank you, Carol. I think that comes from a very much bigger audience that needs to be addressing it. And there are a number of sessions at the Parliament of World Religion that address just that.
Good.
So thank you.
I'll look for them.
Let me go to Ruth, and then we'll close out the recording, and we'll come back at 4 o'clock. And Ruth, what do you think the future is?
I remember a NAID meeting, I think it was in San Francisco some 15 years ago, when a similar question was asked. And I raised my hand and I said, I hope the interfaith movement will become extinct. And everybody gasped. We're all trying to build up the movement, and Ruth was asking it to become extinct. And I went on to explain, I said, what I mean by that is I want interfaith engagement to become so much a part of our lives every day that we don't need a movement. We don't need regular conferences.
Right.
We don't need to sit in rooms and think about how do we get people engaged, because it will already be there. And some 10 years ago, I interviewed Professor Diana Eck at Harvard for the Interfaith Observer. I wrote a series of 3 articles. And I remember how she started the interview was that she said, there will be no institution, no school, no neighborhood, no family, no business. There will be no one that will be able to say that they haven't had some interfaith engagement or challenge, because it's happening across the board. And 2 days ago, I looked up the first film I made for the Encyclopedia Britannica was called Israeli Boy Life on a Kibbutz. And now it's being shown over again because it has a lot of material of which has become archival, because I made it, I think it was 40 years ago. And I went online because I'm in touch with the young boy who was the center of the film. He was the star of the film. He's now a grandfather, et cetera, et cetera. And I went on to see who was in his family. And I discovered now that his younger brother, who was a baby when I made the film, married into an Asian family. And so part of their genealogical tree now is an entire group of Asians. And I thought to myself, you know, from the Israeli kibbutz to Asia, it seems like a huge jump. But today that's not true. If you look around and you ask people who are in their families, you will see that many of them have an interfaith family with, they didn't try to get it. They didn't maneuver so that they could have exposure to people who were Muslim and Hindu and Jehovah's Witnesses, et cetera, et cetera. It just happened. So we're moving in that direction. And what I see as being very different about the nature of the interfaith community is that phase one that you were talking about, Paul, that was just so we could come to know one another, just to be able to recognize people from different backgrounds, different belief systems, and so forth. So we were all in the stage of amazement and trepidation of what it would be like to associate with people unlike ourselves. And we've passed that. We've surpassed that. And so then the next stage was, what activities could we do together? Well, we started creating interfaith events together. And we just started touching onto the major problems confronting the entire world. And I want to say that having studied the origin of the climate movement, it did not take off until the Muslim imams, the rabbis, the preachers, the people who headed the religious communities of the world told their congregations, we have to pay attention to the world because God asked us to be the custodians and stewards. And so suddenly the movement went from being one of conscious about being mindful of the world we live in to suddenly being religious, spiritual mandate. This is part of what we're being asked to do by the creator, by the universe, by the divine intelligence. And when that happened, suddenly the movement became so numerous and active. And I paid attention to that because that made me understand how powerful we are without really knowing it. And Bettina, the AI issue is something I would like to see the interfaith community address because our ethics are lagging behind our technology. And it can't be one religion stepping forward and saying, this is not ordained by God, this is devil's work. It can't be that. It has to be, again, the interfaith movement. I want to see us take leadership in examining what is being done in the laboratories and being able to say, no, we are not approving this. We're not approving cloning human beings. You know, we're not approving attaching everybody's brain to one giant brain and getting rid of people on the earth. If we don't step forward together, all of us, it's not going to happen. So and what's beautiful about the interfaith movement is that it crosses all boundaries all over the world. There's no other movement we can say that about. And so this time of what Paul referred to is, and you also mentioned, this is holy collaboration time. And I think we have to be selective about the issues we take on. I don't think we can take on everything at once. But AI, as all of us have noticed from the articles that have been the plethora and just been coming out of every source recently, this is an issue, whether it's Chat GPT and having your thesis written by a computer, or whether it's a computer telling you your services are no longer needed, this conversation has no further value, right? We know that phrase, we heard that. This is something that we have to take on internationally, and we can do it because we have the networks now. The networks, all those, how should I say, the interstitial tissue exists. We don't have to build it. We'll make it even richer than we have until now, but it already exists. Diana X said when they had a crisis in Boston that involved one of the members of the Sikh community being harmed by someone else, she called a meeting and immediately everybody came. The Muslims, the Christians, the Jews, the Hindus, not just the Sikhs, everybody came. It was everybody's problem. And so I envision, I mean, it's very easy to become discouraged and fearful. And that's the worst thing we can do, is to go forward in fear. We need to go forward in strength and power and recognition of what the interfaith movement has created as a global web of light. And so I would like to see us, of course, nuclear disarmament, of course, the climate, but we also have to think about what it is we can do together that is going to make a shift in the world. And I want to go back to one of my favorite quotes from the Aquarian conspiracy, Marilyn Ferguson. I've quoted this before and I come back to it each time. She said, there are people all over the world, each doing similar parallel work. They don't know each other, but the moment they know each other, the moment they are connected, the entire earth will shift. And it only needs critical mass. It doesn't need everybody to do that. It needs just a small, dedicated group of people. And this is our challenge, and this is our mandate, and this is my wish.
Thank you, Ruth. For time-wise, instead of taking a half hour between the presentations, right now we'll take 15 minutes